So it was while you were there that you decided you didn't want to go into medicine anymore? Or you
No,
want to stay
so
in
then
medicine?
it gets complicated, right? So then I
because
decided
I was still
in the midst of my
trauma.
residency. So then I went back to Hopkins to finish my surgical training. But then I decided, you know what? I think I might actually go into cardiac surgery, which I'd always been interested in. So when I was in medical school, I was really torn between cancer surgery and cardiac surgery. And, to go into cancer surgery, I think the real focus is going to be on research. Like you have to be involved in science and surgery. Whereas I thought in cardiac surgery, it's just pretty much the coolest surgery. Like it's the most technically demanding surgery by far. I shouldn't say by far. I mean, I think there are other things that are partly on par technically. But I was like, I also came back in the mindset of, you know what, I'm just going to become like a great technician, right? And I loved operating. I mean, the heart is, in one sense, the simplest organ in the body. Like it's really simple to understand what it's doing. Unlike the brain or the liver where it's just like 10 layers of complexity. Like we kind of know what's going on with the heart. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to operating on it, it's all a mechanical problem. Like, oh, this valve doesn't work. Oh, this pipe doesn't work. Oh, this thing doesn't work. But that was sort of my concession of, well, you know what? You don't have to be the best surgeon scientist. Why don't you just be the best surgeon? Because there you're more in control, right? That's now just a function of how hard do you want to work. And that was sort of right up my alley.
And so then how did that path then drift to you don't want to do any of this anymore?
I think over the next couple of years, just a couple of things changed. One was, I wasn't getting frustrated with these patients that we were talking about earlier. It wasn't the trauma patients that were getting to me. There was something else that was getting to me that was much more frustrating, which was the entire system. It seemed like everything we did was this last-ditch effort to put incredible resources into a person's life at the very end, and we didn't really move the needle that much, mm-hmm. right? So it just seemed like a broken system. On the other end of the spectrum, there's something else that did strike me as broken, which actually contrasts or contradicts a little bit of what I said earlier. I did feel that there was a subtle difference in the quality of residents. So remember, there was this guy, Chris Sonenday, who's like the best resident that ever lived. I think I was a good resident. I think there were some other really good residents. But there were others that just, they were good, but they weren't great. And the thing about residency that really bugged me, and I think part of this was I was watching my brother, who was a lawyer. So he came out of law school when I came out of medical school, like we were the same time. And so I start residency when he starts this law practice, or he joined like this law firm. And I remember seeing that it was a totally different world. Like their promotions seemed more merit-based. Mm-hmm. Like they went up the ranks, they got bonuses, like all these things happened that were a function of. So my brother was like, he was like breaking every record at his law firm, right? Like nobody could work as hard. Nobody could bill as many hours. Like nobody could like crush it like he could. And he was being rewarded for it. Now, he ended up hating it. He left. He's now a public defender, or he's a prosecutor rather. So, takes a huge pay cut to go and become a prosecutor because that's what he really wanted to do. But the point is, he could have risen all the way up that chain. And I remember thinking in residency, I'm like, we all get paid the same. We all take the same number of years to get through. It seems crazy to me. Like there's no other system where this would be the case. Like I couldn't think of another system where you just had this complete, total lack of meritocracy. It was really hard to get fired from residency. Like I saw some real knuckleheads do some real stupid things. I never actually saw anybody get fired, which is not to say you couldn't. I'm sure you could. But I felt like I was working a lot harder than was necessary because I just wanted to be better. And I thought, God, it's still crazy that this is going to take this many years to get through. There was just a whole bunch of things about the system structurally that I thought were completely broken. And then on the other side, I just felt like healthcare was completely broken as a system, right? So we have this idea, I don't remember the exact stats, but you're going to spend 50, 60% of your entire healthcare dollars in like the last year or two of your life. Something asinine, right? And so at the time, my wife said to me, you are clearly upset about this system. I think you have two choices. You should either fix the system or leave it. But I think that what you're doing now, which is staying in the system and not changing it, will probably not be sustainable. And so I think the toughest decision I ever made was at that point, because I'm 30, I don't know, probably 32, 33. I've invested 10 years into this, and I'm thinking I want a do-over. I want a complete do-over, which, everybody knows that the sunk cost fallacy is called the sunk cost fallacy for a reason, but it's still a damn compelling reason to keep doing something.
Yeah.
So that was that was a super difficult time. And, in part, you sort of feel like you're letting your mentors down, because a lot of people had invested a lot in me, right? Hopkins had taken me, right? I was like one of the 6 chosen ones. They only take 6 categoricals a year. So now you're going to leave that program. And there were, a couple of attendings I'd become really close to who really believed in me and really said, like, you're gonna do something really special. And then to say, actually, I'm going to leave. And I'm not even going to be a doctor anymore. I'm just going to go and,
So then you roll straight to Mackenzie?
Well, so what I wanted to do is actually go back and get an MBA, because the other thing I missed a lot in medicine was I missed quantitative stuff. Like I missed math. Like I missed being an engineer. And the few times I tried to bring that into medicine, I got spanked. Right. So there's one story. I think I've talked about this maybe on a podcast before. I don't think so though. This was actually probably my first or second year. I'm in the ICU taking care of this patient, and this patient's on a very, very toxic drug called gentamicin. This is a drug that has to be dosed very carefully. So if you give too much of it, you can destroy their hearing permanently and destroy their kidneys permanently. If you don't give enough of it, the bacteria that you're trying to kill will kill them. So you have a very narrow range in which to give the dose. So there is no standard dose. It's not like, just take 875 milligrams of this every 12 hours. No, it's take a first guess based on the patient's body weight. So this many milligrams per kilogram, give it to them, and then measure a level. And then once the level comes below a certain point, give it again. And I remember thinking, that doesn't even make sense. Like, surely we know enough about the kinetics of this drug that we could build a mathematical model to predict when to give it. So I looked up, a couple of papers, a couple of books, one night on call. Sure enough, I find there's a very predictable alpha and beta decay cycle for this drug. So literally in Excel, I build a model that uses a very simple differential equation, and it needs a few inputs, and it will predict the kinetic curve of this. And I'm like, all right, let's try it out. So take one of my patients, going to be on gentamicin. I do everything the standard way, but I plug my numbers into the model to see, would my model have predicted this better and better? And the answer was unquestionably. So now I start to get a little confident in the idea. So the next night, I'm like, all right, I'm actually going to start dosing the patient based on the model, which never puts the patient in jeopardy, because you're always going to check the level before you dose, but you're going to do so at the exact right moment. And so my model predicted at 4:31 a.m., this patient will nadir, which means that's when you need to dose them. So sure enough, at 4 in the morning, I ask the nurse to draw the patient's blood to confirm they're just about to nadir. We're going to redose them, and away we go. So next morning on rounds, in the ICU, you round as a big team. I'm presenting that, this patient who's one of my patients, and I start explaining that, okay, so the patient received their dose of gentamicin at 4:30 in the morning, and the attending says, well, what do you mean 4:30 in the morning? We never dose gent at 4:30 in the morning. We dose it at 7 a.m., always. And I'm like, yeah, but the patient hit their nadir at 4:30. It's like, I don't care, and so we got into this huge fight, and I almost got fired. That would have got me fired, by the way.
Finally, someone gets fired.
Finally, someone gets fired. And so, that pissed me off beyond words, right? It pissed me off that, it just struck me as so anti-intellectual. Maybe my model wasn't perfect. We never know. But the fact that nobody even cared to say, is there a better way to do this? That drove me batshit crazy. And that's just one of many stories like that happened through residency, where I was like, it's almost like we want to live in the 1950s here. And so you have that sort of pain of problem solving is not valued. At least it didn't seem valued to me. It was valued in the lab, but I had decided now I'm not going to be in the lab. So here I live in this world where problem solving is not valued. And I'm not a quant anymore. I don't do math anymore. And I really loved math. So I started tutoring kids in math. I made like a little bit of free time so I could like tutor high school kids in calculus just to like get my calculus on again, missing it, but it wasn't the same. So then I was like, maybe I'll go back and get an MBA. So I looked into that, didn't feel like I was already drowning in debt at that point in time. You've got med school debt is sort of painful. And, residency, you're making, I think at the time we're making about $34,000 a year. So you're not even putting a dent in your $200,000 debt sort of thing. Dang. So then I remember one night I was on call, and I was really pissed to be on call this night. And now you can relate to this better than I'll ever be able to relate to it, because I'm sure this happened to you your whole life. But my best friend from high school tells me in February he's getting married that August. And I'm the best man. He lives in Toronto. So he's like, this is the date of my wedding. I forget what it was, like August 5th. It's a Saturday. I want you to be the best man. I'm completely honored. So I tell my program director in February, can I not be on call that day or the day before? I need to be able to fly out of Baltimore on a Friday and come back on a Sunday. And he's like, yeah, that's no problem. I remind him 3 times. No problem. Sure enough, the call schedule comes out. I'm on call Saturday. I'm on call the day of the guy's wedding. Like, you got to be kidding me. So it's 2:00 that morning. I'm down in the ER looking at a chest CT scan on a guy who I'm worried has what's called a dissecting aorta. And the radiologist, I introduce myself, and she's very nice, and she sort of walks me through the CT scan, and we just start shooting the breeze a little bit. And she says, oh, yeah, you seem kind of down tonight. What's up? And I was like, I'm just kind of pissed off. I wish I wasn't here, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, yeah, I can relate. I used to be in a surgical residency myself. And I was like, oh, really? She goes, yeah, I did my internship in surgery up at the University of Seattle, and I just hated it so much that I left and actually joined this company called McKinsey. Worked there for 2 years, but then decided I wanted to come back to medicine. But I wanted to do it in sort of a kinder, gentler way. So that's why I'm back here doing radiology. And I was like, oh, what's this McKinsey thing? I'd never heard of it. And so she told me all about it, and I was like, that sounds interesting. How do I apply? And that was sort of the beginning of it. So she introduced me to some folks, and then I had to like study all over again, because the way they interview at these consulting firms is very specific, and it's not. You can be the smartest dude in the world. If you show up and you haven't thought through how to solve a case, like what are called these case interviews, you're going to flail. So you have to actually put in some legwork and study. So I got a bunch of books on case interviews, and I'd be sitting in the trauma bay waiting for bodies to come in. I'd be like reading my cases, case interview things before. So that was sort of the transition.